Hey guys, I hope you're all doing great. It's been a while since we last connected, I guess, and this time we're back with a webinar that will address some of the advanced features of the Zobot, Zoho SalesIQ's bot building platform. So today's webinar will be the second part of the SalesIQ Scripts platform webinar. Just to recap, the first part of this webinar had consisted of the basics of the SalesIQ Scripts platform. And in this one, we'll be focusing on all of the advanced concepts that are available inside the SalesIQ Scripts platform to build your Zobot. So without any further ado, let's jump right into our webinar. So let me tell you how I've structured this webinar. First, we'll quickly brush through the basics of the Zobot, what it is and what it is capable of, how these Zobots are built, what are the platforms that you can build your Zobots on, the four major handlers that constitute the backbone of the Zobot, and so on. Then we'll take a deep dive into the advanced features of the Zobot, such as the object references, the actions that can be performed by the Zobot for visitors, how to use input and display cards inside the scripts, and what new cards we've included in our list. That's exciting, isn't it? The VisitorSession API in the Zobot, how to use OTP for validation inside the Zobot, and also how to seamlessly integrate with different services using the Zobot platform. So all of these will be discussed with respect to the SalesIQ Scripts platform, but they're also available for other platforms. First, let me tell you how the basic flow goes. A visitor lands on the website. Visitor matches the criteria that is set inside the Zobot, the bot will trigger a message. If not, it doesn't trigger a message and the visitor must proceed to initiating a chat with the Zobot himself. So when the visitor sends out a message, the message handler will come into play. It checks if the context in the message exists, and if it does, it will collect all of the inputs that it can find inside the message. Otherwise, it will start looking for another message that will match the existing context. Once the message handler is successfully executed, the context handler executes. So this is invoked after collecting all of the necessary inputs for one particular context. So, all right, that's how the basic flow goes. And let's take a quick recap. In the last webinar, we had looked at how to configure basic Zobot information, then to choose platforms, to structure handlers, to set up a connection, and also push visitor details into CRM. So the first advanced feature that we'll be looking at are about the objects in the Zobot. So before you start building Zobot for your business, you need to know about the objects that are available in the Zobot. So this section basically aims to give you an idea of all of the core objects that are found throughout a custom bot implementation for your website. So these objects will serve as a guideline for input parameters and your output response formats for the scripts used inside the bots. They can handle visitor chats, they can forward chats to humans, they can block a spamming visitor, they can collect inputs from calendars, using calendars. They can also do multiple input collection for one response. They're capable of so much more. So we'll take a look at all of these objects one by one. The first is the request object. So this request object is basically a map that contains all of the details of a visitor's request. All right. So using this request object, you can retrieve details such as the request ID, which is unique to each action that is performed by the visitor on your website, the embed inside which the chat is going on, and the OS used by the browser. Sorry, the OS used by the visitor, the browser that he has accessed your page from, the location of the visitor, and by location, I mean the country, city, state, latitude, and longitude. You can collect all of these details, and also the IP address of the visitor. All right. So that was the request object. So it's basically a map that contains all of the details of the request that was raised by the visitor. Then comes the visitor object that contains all of the profile information of the website visitor. Using this, you can get details like their name, email, phone, browser, IP address of the visitor, etc. The URL of the page where the visitor is currently accessing, the title of the visitor's current web page, the page is currently on, the count on the number of past chats that the visitor has had with operators of the Zobot, the source from where the visitor is referred from where he was redirected by email or using social media, etc. The category and the potential of the visitor inside Zoho CRM can also be retrieved. And you can also retrieve custom information about the visitor, like the member ID. All right, so there's so much more that you can retrieve using the visitor object. The attachment object is a collection object which contains the files and the respective details of the file that were shared by the visitor during the conversation as a message. So this will contain attributes like the details of the visitor who has sent the file, the type of file that has been shared by the visitor, the JSON object that contains the details of the file shared, and the time at which the file was shared in milliseconds. And also, if there are comments attached to the file, you can also retrieve them. This will also contain some file object properties because there has been an attachment that has been shared. So it also contains the attachments properties like the size of the file or the name and the type of the file that has been shared by the visitor. The message object. So each text message in the conversation between the Zobot and the visitor will be considered as the message object. So this has two major attributes. So first one is the text attribute, which is a mandatory attribute. This will be basically the entire content of the conversation. So whatever the visitor has entered in the message will be considered as the text attribute. And then there is meta, which is not a mandatory attribute. So this will basically contain the details of the visitor's message, such as the card type, say if you're using any input card or display card, the type of card and the type of message, etc. will be contained in the message object. Then come responses. So responses are very important object inside the Zobot platform. So this will contain the output responses given by the Zobot during any conversation. So this has four major attributes. So first one is the action. So action denotes, so the response is a map object, you need to remember that. So the action will denote the action performed by the bot, whether it is a reply action, a forward action, a block action, or an end action. There are different actions that we'll be talking about during the later part of this webinar. So action denotes the action that is performed by the bot. The second one is replies. So this constitutes all of the replies that were given by the bot for any particular action that has been performed. Then comes the input. So this will be the input type that is displayed to the visitor by the Zobot. And then we have suggestions. So the response suggestions given by the Zobot to the visitor are constituted here. So when a response contains both input and suggestions, the Zobot will consider only the input and it will ignore the suggestions. You need to remember that. Any interaction can have one type of input, either an input widget or free-form text that is supported by suggestions. So also, you need to remember that visitors cannot enter any text manually when suggestions are displayed inside the chat widget. This is an important point that has to be noted. So out of these four attributes for the response object, action and replies are mandatory ones. So for any reply that you constitute, you need to mention the type of action that you want the Zobot to perform and the corresponding reply. You also need to remember that input and suggestions are not mandatory for other platforms. Since we're discussing about the SalesIQ scripts platform right now, I'm talking about all of that, all of those parameters that you have to include mandatory. So let's move on to the actions in the Zobot. So there are several actions that can be performed by the Zobot during the course of its conversation with a website visitor. So these Zobot actions will only accept text as their value, and they can be any of the following. They can be a reply, a forward action, block, context action, pending, or end actions. All right. So we look at them one by one. So this is a list of all of the actions that the Zobot is capable of performing right now. So the first one is the reply action. So when the Zobot can handle the visitor on its own, the reply action can be used to provide replies to the visitor's queries. So these replies, they accept only a collection, that is a list as the value. So replies only accept lists as their value. The collection or the list can in turn have one or more strings. So there are three options available when the reply action is used. All right. So the first one, it can be used when there are one or more strings that have to be displayed. In case you have multiple maps, say when display cards such as articles, images, and links are used. The third one is when a combination of strings and maps have to be used. So for all of these three conditions, the reply action can be used. All right. So let me show you how this looks in the code. So inside the message handler, there are always two different attributes, the chat attribute and the message attribute. So the chat attribute will consist of all of the responses that have to be given for the first question from the visitor, all right? And the message attribute will contain the replies to all of the subsequent questions that will come in from the visitor's side. Okay, so we look at how the reply action is, all right? So here, I have defined a few cases and I have defined my action as reply. So like I had already mentioned, the type of action and the replies are mandatory for any action that you want to configure for the Zobot. All right. So here my action type will be reply. All right. And I'm giving a reply. I'm just giving in a string with plain text and a smiley. So I'm just saying, hello there, looking for anything specific. So these are the two mandatory attributes that have to be included. And in addition, I'm also including suggestions. All right. So along with the plain text that I'm displaying here, I also want to give options for my visitor to choose from. All right. So this condition says that if the message does not equal these 4 different options, this will have to be displayed. So let me just say, hi. Okay. So do you see that? So since my message has not is not the same as any of these options defined here, the Zobot has gone ahead and it has displayed the responses that I have defined for this condition. All right. So here is my plain text, which is the reply. And here are my suggestions. It has displayed 4 different suggestions. So that's how the reply action will look inside your Zobot script. So this can be defined in any of the handlers, the message, context, trigger, or failure handlers. Okay. We'll go ahead and look at the next action. So the next one is the forward action. So when the bot is not trained to handle a visitor, it can forward a chat to a human operator. So the bot can also forward the chats now to a specific operator who is an expert in the topic. So there are 3 cases that are possible for this action. So the first one is generic forward. When just the action and the corresponding replies are specified, the chat will get forwarded to all of the available operators inside the organization, and one of them can pick it up and answer the query. So that was generic forward. Then we have operator specific forward. When the Zobot doesn't know how to handle a particular visitor query, it can forward the chat to a specific operator who is an expert in the topic, and he or she can answer it. In this case, the email address of the operator has to be specified along with the action and the reply. Then we have department specific forward. The Zobot can also forward chats to a specific department to which the query is related. Here, the idea of the corresponding department is mentioned along with the action and the replies. All right. So there is an important point to note. If you're using the operator forward option inside the Watson Assistant platform, we're now looking at SalesIQ scripts, but in case you're using it inside the Watson Assistant platform, then on adding the operator's email address, the domain of the address gets truncated by Watson. All right. So it happens on using the special characters $$ and @ in a word. In order to prevent that, you'll have to add 2 double slashes before the domain name. All right. So this will help with the truncation. So let me show you how these 3 different cases look inside the code. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to configure the forward action for this option that says I'm new here, just browsing. All right. So we'll first look at generic forward. So for generic forward, which is our first case, we are defining the action type, which is mandatory. Action is forward, and the replies, which is again mandatory. We are saying, and we're just giving a plain text reply saying that your chat is being forwarded. So this message will be displayed while the Zobot is transferring the chat to one of the operators inside your organization. So let's go ahead and see how this looks on execution. All right, I'm going to go ahead and refresh my preview window. Whenever I make a change to any one of the scripts, I need to save the scripts and refresh the preview window for my changes to reflect. All right, so here is my trigger message, and I'm going to go ahead and click on I'm new here, just browsing. So in that case, do you see this? The chat has been forwarded. All right, so that was generic forward. With respect to operator specific forward, you will have to specify the operator's email address like I had already mentioned. So here is the action type, action forward. And again, I'm also defining the replies. So action type and the replies are mandatory. And now I'm defining the email address of the operators I want to forward the chats to. All right, so here is the email address of one of the operators I have inside my organization. Let's look at how this works. See, it says that your chat is being forwarded to one of your operators. All right, so once the chat begins to forward chats to operators or departments, the bot will become inactive. All right, so once the forward action has been executed, your operators will start taking up and the bot will go under hibernation, or it'll go into an inactive mode. All right, so the next one is department specific forward. All right, so for department specific forward, like I had mentioned, you will have to define the department ID. So here I have defined the action type, which is forward, and the replies, the two mandatory parameters, and then the ID of the department that I want to forward my chat to. So here is the ID of the department. All right, so to get the department ID, you can go ahead to the departments section of your SalesIQ portal, and you can get the ID of the department from there. All right, so this is the ID of the department that my chat is going to be forwarded to. So I'm going to go ahead and click on save. Let's refresh the preview window. So yes, so your chat is being forwarded to the respective department. All right. So the next one is the operator busy action. When the Zobot doesn't know how to handle the visitor, and it also doesn't want to forward it to the forward the chat to human operators due to various reasons. So these reasons may include, maybe non-business hours of your organization, or all of your operators are busy with another chat. In these cases, the operator busy action can be used. In this case, the visitor will be prompted to leave a message and the chat will be marked as missed. So this is the operator busy code. All right, so I'm going to define the action as operator busy. So this will be the action name that you will have to define for this condition, and the replies that says thank you for contacting us, one of our operators will reach you shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and save and refresh. So do you see this? The operator busy action is triggered. Visitors will get a form to leave a message. So you will have to restart the bot to continue. So the operator busy action is triggered and visitors will get a form to leave a message. So these chats will be marked as missed, and your operators will be able to pick these up and answer them later on. So the next action that we'll be looking at is the block action. So this action can be used whenever the bot finds a vulnerability in the chat and it wants to block the IP address of the visitor who caused this spam. So for this case, the block action can be used. Taking a look at the code again. So let us go ahead and comment these lines. And here is the block action. All right. So my action type is block and my replies are, sorry, you're blocked from accessing the chat window. I'll save and refresh. So the visitor IP block action is triggered and the bot will become inactive. All right. So the visitor will not be able to send any more messages. He will not be able to type any more messages and send them out once the IP address has been blocked by the Zobot. The next action is the the context action. All right. So when the bot wants to collect multiple inputs to perform a single action, like we had already discussed, it returns a context. So the execution will pass on to the context handler. A context is basically a definition of a web form that collects multiple inputs in a conversational manner and executes an action, which is the context handler. So once all the inputs for one context are collected, that context will end and the next context will start executing. All right. So let's get back to our code. So when I choose the option that says I'm an existing customer and I need help, the action that I have defined here is the context action. So here is my action type, which is context. So whenever the action type is context, you need to specify a context ID. So the bots will know which context to execute and which ones to move on to. All right. The context ID is unique to every context that you define inside the SalesIQ scripts platform. All right. So the context ID is mandatory when your action type is context. So here I'm defining the next question that I want, the first question that I want to be executed for the context. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the customer what he needs help with. In case he says, I'm an existing customer and I need help, I have given a reply, which is mandatory. And in addition, I'm giving suggestions. I'm giving him 3 different options that he can choose from. And I'm also displaying the question. So let me go ahead and save and I'll show you how this executes. So when I click on the option, this context, the help context, the context with the ID help starts executing. And the first question in the context has been displayed to the visitor. So there are 3 different options that I can choose from. When I click on questions about the product, so it's again displaying a set of messages along with suggestions. I'll show you where this flow goes. So now we're going to go into the context handler and look at the block that has the same ID as the one mentioned here. So let's go into the trigger handler, sorry, the context handler. So do you see this? So here we will say if context ID equals help, display another set of questions. So which is where we have defined the second response for this particular context. So I've also included a link to the help page here. All right. And I'm again displaying a set of suggestions. So I'm going to go ahead and click on yes, I need help. Now it's asking me for my email. All right. So this is how the context action executes. So once all of the inputs or answers for one particular context have been completed, that context ends and the execution will move on to the next context. Let's go ahead to our next action. The next one is the pending action. So if the bot needs time to reply to one of your visitors' messages, the pending action can be used. For example, when it's trying to create a report of all of the activities that the visitor has performed and it wants to send it to the visitor, it's obviously going to take some time. Or if it's trying to create a profile for a visitor, that will take some time. So all of these actions must be lesser than 3 minutes. So in these cases, the pending action can be used. So when the pending action is used, a unique request ID will be available inside the request param in all of the handlers. So we had looked at the request object previously, right? So there will be a request ID, which is unique to each of these requests available inside the object. And once the pending action is returned by the bot, the request ID found in the request object sent in the param during execution will be used to handle this pending action. So while the action is pending and the response is yet to be given by the Zobot, info messages can be sent to your visitor to show the progress of the pending action. So during the pending action, the progress information and the response can be sent to the visitor using callback APIs. So there are 2 callback APIs that can be used for this. The first one can be used to send progress information during the pending action of the Zobot. So the requested payload here for this API is the message or the information that you want to send to the visitor. The second one can be used to send a response indicating that the pending action of the Zobot is complete. So this will be sent at the end of the pending action. So any response payload is acceptable here, and this will get rendered or executed like how it is returned inside any handler. So that's the pending action. So here it is. So my action type will be pending, and I'm just going to go ahead and give a reply. All right. So let me just save this. All right. So this is how it will look while the bot is looking for a solution or it's generating a report for the website visitor. And then finally, we have the end action in case the Zobot wants to end the chat conversation. So here it is. So my action type will be end, and my replies say, thank you for contacting us today. The chat has ended, or something of that sort. So all of these replies are can be replies of your choice, all right? But you need to define the action type and the replies, all right? So that was the end action. So you can also schedule a delay for the end of any action, all right? In that case, you will have to include response.put, and you will say delay, and let me say 30 seconds. The minimum delay that you can set is 30 seconds, all right? You cannot set a delay slower than that. So do you see this? The bot chat will be completed in 30 seconds, and the visitor will be prompted to rate the session based on the configuration. So you can immediately end the chat, ongoing chat, or you can also schedule a delay for the end of the chat. So that was about all of the actions that the Zobot is capable of performing. Moving on to input and display cards. So the Zobot not only allows you to use text, but also widgets like calendars, articles, URLs, etc. to ease your customer's experience. For this, we have features called input and display cards. We looked at a bunch of these cards during our previous webinars. All right. So first, there are input cards. There are different types of actions used by the Zobots to procure inputs from visitors. And some of the most commonly used cards are calendars, sliders, location widgets, response suggestions, etc. All right. So we have also added some new widgets to the list. You now have widgets, input widgets to collect your visitor's name. That looks like this. You will always have the type, your placeholder. The type and the placeholder are mandatory values that you will have to define for these input widgets. Value and error are not mandatory. So you have input widgets to collect your visitor's name, to collect their email address, telephone numbers, and also their website URLs. All right. Following this, we have display cards. So these display widgets will help you display rich content that consists of different formats, images, links, etc. to your visitors. So we already had articles and images to assist your visitors, and some new display widgets have also been added. Using the video widget, you can send video files to your visitors every now and then. There are two types of videos that you can send, videos that have been uploaded on YouTube and videos that have been uploaded on a server. All right, so now then you also have the attachments card, using which the Zobot can send attachments like PDF, doc files, etc. to your visitors during a chat, just like how an agent does. So these are the two new additions. Let's go ahead and configure a few. I'll show you how these are configured inside the script. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you how this will look inside your script. Right. In case the visitor chooses, I want a product demo, I'm going to go ahead and ask the visitor to enter their details like their name, their email, their phone number, and so much more. All right. So here it is. My action type here is context, and my context ID is demo. And here is my question. So here I have defined the key, the name of the question, and I've also given my default reply. And here the input type is the name widget. All right, and I've given a placeholder. The name, the type, and the placeholder are default values, and I've also included the error, which is not mandatory. You can include it if you want to. All right, so let's go ahead and save, refresh the preview window, and I'm going to go ahead and click on I want a product demo. So here it is. This is the input widget that says enter your name. So this is the placeholder. Do you see the gray text inside the box? This is the placeholder that we have defined. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my name. So once I enter my name, it's going ahead to the next step and asking me my email. So let's look at how this is. Since the action is context, the execution will move on to the context handler. So let's go ahead and look for the demo block. So here it is. If context ID equals demo, it will go ahead and ask me for my email address. So once the email address is obtained, it ends the chat, and one of our product specialists will reach out soon to the message that it displays. All right, so that's how you use the input widgets. Let's go ahead and look at how display widgets are used. So here I have an option that says, I want to know about the Zobot. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and display a YouTube video for all of my visitors so that they can just click and redirect to the page. All right. So my action here is context, and my context ID is Zobot. And here is my reply. All right. So here my card type is video. And I've also included some text that I want to display at the bottom of my video as a description. And here is the URL of the video that I'm going to go ahead and display to my visitor. All right, so let's save this and refresh. So when I click on I want to know about the Zobot, my reply has been given. And here is the video that I wanted to display to my visitors. So when I click on the URL, it's going to take me to the YouTube page and display a video on the Zobot. All right. So let's go ahead and look at the attachment display card. So when you use the attachment display card, your action type is context and the context ID will be Zobot. All right. So here the type is file. So here our type was video. So here our type will be file for the attachment display card and the description. And here you will give the URL of the file that you wish to display to one of your visitors. So I've just included a sample URL for your reference. So this part is where you will include the URL of the file that you want to display to your visitor. All right. So that is the attachment and the video display cards. The next feature that we're going to talk about is the VisitorSession API. So the VisitorSession API is basically used to store values temporarily during a chat conversation with a website visitor. For example, if you want to perform an action like, triggering a message to the visitor based on the time that he had logged into the website, you can set and get the visitor's logged in time during your conversation with the visitor using the API. Remember that the values that are stored inside the VisitorSession API will be available only till the end of the ongoing chat. All right. As another example, also, assume that you own an online clothing store and there's a visitor on your website. You can get the visitor's size at the beginning of the conversation, and then you can store it in the session and reuse it during a later part of the conversation. Say when he's intending to buy a different category of clothing, you can make use of the size that you had obtained in the first place, and you can display suggestions accordingly. All right. So this is the sample code. So let me show you another very solid example of where you can use the VisitorSession API. All right. So this is one of our templates where we had used VisitorSession API. All right. So this one was built for an automobile website. All right. That will help visitors on the website to look for new cars that are in the market. It helps them purchase, and it also helps existing customers opt for services that are exclusive to them. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and show how the VisitorSession API has been used in this case. So there is a module where existing customers can opt for services that are exclusive to them. So in this case, to validate an existing customer, the OTP mechanism has been used, which I'll be discussing as the next part of the session. All right. So the OTP mechanism is used to validate the identity of this existing customer. The OTP is used to verify if they have already registered with us and they've already been created as a lead inside CRM, or a ticket is available for them inside desk. All right. So when the OTP mechanism is used, the OTP is stored in the session. All right. And for this, the VisitorSession API has been used. Do you see this? So this one is used to store the OTP in the session after it has been generated. So Zoho.SalesIQ.VisitorSession, the OTP is set here. All right. So then when the case moves on to validation of the OTP, so the context ID equals validate OTP, we're again getting the OTP that was stored in the visitor session Do you see this? The VisitorSession API is used to get the OTP and it's used to validate it. So the OTP was already generated inside the session. It was stored in the session. And now when we want to validate the identity of the visitor, the OTP that was stored inside the visitor session is again retrieved using get. All right, and then it is validated. And then once the identity is validated, an email will be sent accordingly. All right, so that's how the VisitorSession API can be used. It can be used in this case to store visitor email addresses, visitor sizes, visitor OTP, and so much more. So then comes using OTP for validation. So for industries like banking and e-commerce, users' privacy is extremely critical. All right, since we talk about personal information use and financial transactions, all brands are beginning to take extra precautions to increase security and prevent fraudulent activities. So OTP is one of the most common methods brands use to decrease their risk level. Along with security reasons, brands can also use these OTPs for marketing aims as well. So it's also a practical way of sending hyper-personalized messages to your users or subscribers for instant campaigns. This OTP can be generated inside the Zobot and it can validate visitor identity like we had already looked at. So let me tell you the 7-step code that we have used currently to generate unique OTPs for each visitor on the website. All right, there are also alternate mechanisms, but I'm going to go ahead and show you the method that we have used. So as the first step, the visitor email is obtained using the VisitorSession API. Again, the VisitorSession API that we had looked at is used here, and the email prefix value is generated. All right, so here it is. So the VisitorSession API has been used to get the visitor's email that was collected earlier from the visitor. All right, and then we're getting the email prefix value in 3 steps. We're replacing all of these characters, we're converting them to lowercase, and we're getting the email prefix value. As the second step, we generate 2 random integers. All right. Then the current time is obtained in milliseconds using Zoho.currentTime. And then following this, the time and the random integers will be processed to get a random number. All right. So we're generating a random number in the 4th step. All right. And we're replacing all of the zeros. As the 5th step, the random number string will be jumbled to get a unique OTP. So each OTP that is sent to different visitors has to be unique, and to do so, we're jumbling the random number string that we had generated using the time and the random integers. Then we'll also replace all the new non-numeric characters just in case. Finally, a Z tag will be added to give the OTP a Zoho identity. All right, so once the OTP is generated, it can be sent to the visitor via SMS or email, and the identity can be validated. All right, so we're then storing this OTP in the session so that we can use it to validate the visitor's identity later on, like we had already looked at. So this OTP is generated, stored in the session, and then it is sent to the user using the send mail functionality. We're communicating the OTP to the visitor by email. All right. It is sent along with the current time, and finally we'll go ahead and validate it during the later part of the conversation in case they say they're an existing customer and they want to avail an exclusive service. So this was a sample code that we had looked at. The next one is how to seamlessly integrate with the Zoho service. So you can also make use of features from other Zoho or external services inside the Zobot. For this, you first need to establish a connection with the service. All right. So connections in SalesIQ scripts are interfaces that are used to integrate third-party services with your Zoho service. In this case, Zoho SalesIQ. So these connections are used in a URL invocation task to access authenticated data. To establish a connection, you will have to provide a connection name, and you'll also have to specify the authentication type amongst other details. And when you provide these details, it will take care of authentication and it will establish a safe connection either with Zoho apps or with external apps. So in Deluge, there are basically 4 HTTP methods: get, post, put, and delete, and 3 authentication types: basic, OAuth 1, and OAuth 2, where OAuth 1 and 2 are used to establish a secure access between SalesIQ and other apps. So now I'll show you how to set up a connection, and then we'll go forward to establish connections and access data from two different Zoho services. The first one will be with Zoho CRM, and the second one will be with Zoho Desk. So let me show you how to set up a connection first, and then I will tell you how each of these connections are used inside the code. All right. So to set up a connection, you will have to click on Manage Connections at the bottom of your screen, and the connections dashboard will open up. So inside the dashboard, you will see the list of connections that you have already created. In case you're a new user, you won't be able to see any because you wouldn't have created any. So I'm going to go ahead and add a connection. All right. So since we're going to be working with Zoho services today, I'm just going to go ahead and click on Zoho OAuth, and I'll say Zoho CRM. And then I'm going to go ahead and choose from the available scopes. So here, in case you're establishing a connection with Zoho CRM, the scopes that you will have to choose are Zoho CRM.modules.all. All right. So once I choose this scope, I will go ahead and click on Create and Connect. Now comes the authentication. So I can reuse any of the existing connections, or I can also create a new account. So I'm going to go ahead and reuse. So yes, my connection has been created successfully. So once you create a connection, there's a deluge code snippet that is seen at the bottom, and inside that you will find the connection link name. So when you're creating a connection and using it inside your scripts, I want you to remember something important. So there are the two different parameters that you will have to concentrate on. The first one is the connection name, and the second one is the connection link name. So the connection name is the name that you give to your connection, and the connection link name is the name that is generated by Deluge for your connection. All right. So in order for your connection to work, in case you're using any templates from Zoho's gallery, you will have to replace the connection link name in the templates with the connection link name that was generated for your own connection. Otherwise, your connections will not work. So let's go ahead and create a connection for Zoho Desk. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the scopes that I want. My connection has been created, my scopes are displayed, and here is my connection link name. All right. So that was about how to set up a connection. So now I'll show you how each of these APIs are called inside the script. All right. So first we'll go ahead with CRM. So I'll show you how to create a lead with CRM, what APIs you will have to use. So here I have a context ID that says create lead. So here I'm going to go ahead and create a lead inside Zoho CRM. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and use the name and the email that I had collected during an earlier part of the conversation from the visitor. All right. The API that I have used here is zoho.crm.createRecord. All right. Let me show you the format. All right. So these will be available inside the Deluge guide. All right. So this is the syntax that you will be using. So the variable name and zoho.crm.createRecord, you will have to define the module name. All right. Then you will have to define record details. So record details, they specify the input map. All right. So say the last name, the email, or whatever details you need to create your lead inside CRM, and then you have the options map. All right. And finally, you have the connection link name. All right. Here is where you will have to include your connection link name. So here it is, zoho.crm.createRecord is the API. So this is the module that I want to create my lead in. All right, which is obviously the leads module, and lead info, which is where I have my name and my email address, map, and the name of my connection. All right. So this is how a lead is created inside CRM. I'm scheduling a time for the test drive. You see this? Once a lead is created inside CRM, you will be able to look at the info message here while you're testing it inside the preview window. All right. So here a lead has been created along with the name, the ID, the created time, created by, and all of the details, the email and all of that. All right. So that's how you create a lead inside CRM. So let's go ahead and look at how to configure APIs with Zoho Desk, right? So in case my visitor chooses check service status, my context ID is status. I'm going to go ahead and ask the visitor to enter his ticket ID. So let's go ahead and look at how things work with the Zoho Desk connection. So first we'll be looking at how to create a ticket inside Zoho Desk, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and create a ticket for one of my visitors in case they choose raise a ticket. Let me show you how this is configured first, all right? I'm going to go ahead and get the visitor's name, his email address, what his complaint is about, and the priority. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a ticket inside Zoho Desk. So you will have the variable and Zoho.desk.create, and then you will have to include the org ID, the module name, record values, and the name of the connection, all right? So here is my org ID and the module, the search value, and then the name of my connection, all right? So so the subject of my ticket will be the complaint that the visitor had entered, and then I'm going to go ahead and include the department ID and the contact ID, all right? So here I'm going to go ahead and create the ticket. Zoho.desk.create is the API that is used, my org ID, the modules, and details along with my connection name, right? So I'm going to go ahead and save, and I'm going to also print the ticket info. And to search for records inside Zoho Desk, the API used will be as follows. And the API, you will have the variable, and the API is zoho.desk.search records along with the org ID, the module name, the query, the from index, the limit, and the connection name. So here it is, zoho.desk.search records org ID, the module, the search value, the limit, and the name of the connection. All right. So this API will search for a ticket with a particular search value, and it will return responses for you. So that is how you use APIs to search records or create leads or search leads inside your Zoho CRM and your Zoho Desk connections. So that was about some of the most commonly used, important, and advanced features available inside the Zobot. Let me give you a quick recap. We had looked at Zobot objects, actions that can be performed using input cards, display cards, the VisitorSession API, using OTPs to validate visitor identity, and also how to connect to Zoho services using connections. Head over to our developer documentation for more information on the Zobot. Also, don't forget to visit the sample scripts page for more customized scripts. In case of queries regarding the same, drop us an email at support@zohosalesiq.com and follow us on Twitter for more updates on our features. I'm hoping to see you in the next webinar. Until then, thank you.